Hello, my fair citizens. My name is Stone. I'm the mayor of Sodium City, and today we have the top 10 cards that I'm most excited to brew around when Phyrexia All Is One comes out. So sit back, put some extra salt on your fries, subscribe to the channel. Let's get into it. Starting off, we have Elesh Norn, Mother of Machines. Now, you would think that with this being the flagship card of the set, that she would be higher up on the list, but she kind of just feels like a bottom, so she's just going to start off the list at number 10. Elesh Norn is a 5-mana 4/7 legendary Phyrexian Praetor with Vigilance. Now, if a permanent enters the battlefield, causing a trigger ability of another permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. Now, permanents entering the battlefield don't cause abilities of permanents your opponents control to trigger at the same time. So we get double enter the battlefield effects, and they get no enter the battlefield effects. This is fantastic because I personally really like Strict Proctor, and Strict Proctor essentially counters all enter the battlefield effects, but it is double-sided, and you can still technically pay 2 to overwrite that counter. With Elesh Norn, that doesn't necessarily happen, which I do really like, but again, at the same time, we use Proctor with things like Lotus Field, which helps us ramp. With Elesh Norn, you can't really do that because then you have to sacrifice 4 lands instead of 2, which never a good idea. The first idea that I have for this card and the deck list that's in the description below is an energy deck. Yeah, it's one of those decks that you basically never see. But all of the enter the battlefield effects that we are going to end up doubling are basically all the energy cards that we would ever play in an energy deck anyway. So we have the Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot, we have the Servant of the Conduit, and we have Aether Hub. Now, the more energy that we have, the better, which I guess is the point of having an energy deck to begin with. But because we're using Aetherworks Marvel every time we activate it, it uses 6 energy, which is a lot, especially because every single card that you use with energy usually only adds about 2 energy. And this is exactly why we want those double ETB effects, because it really, really helps. So with the addition of Elesh Norn, we also have Panharmonicon, so we're like double, quadrupling, 6 tuple, I don't know, some math terms. We're doing a lot, we're getting a lot, and that's really all that matters. But we also have a Lithoform engine, so we can also copy the permanents, or we can copy the triggers, like we can copy Aetherworks Marvel triggers, get a little extra value, get some of our win cons. Our win cons are pretty sparse in here. We're not really doing anything crazy over the top. We're not doing Ugin because Ugin's boring. We could be using Olamog, but we're not doing that because that's also boring. But that's probably the best option because with Lithoform Engine, you can copy the Exile trigger. There's a lot of stuff that you can do with that, but this is just the general shell of what you would want to use. The win condition that we are using for this particular deck, outside of Elesh Norn, obviously, is going to be Sifter Worm. It's a 7/7 worm with trample that allows you to scry 3 whenever you put it into the battlefield, and you get to gain life based on the mana value of the card that's on top of the library. Now, this is really just super, super good because you get to scry 3 twice or 3 times, depending on what cards you have on the battlefield. You can copy that trigger, so you get to gain a bunch of life. You really get to sift through all of your deck to make sure that you have the exact cards you want on the top of your library for whenever you activate Aetherworks Marvel. Now, this is super, super good because you can activate Aetherworks Marvel at the end of their turn. So on your upkeep, you know exactly what you have on the top of your library. And if you want it to be cast onto the battlefield with Aetherworks Marvel before your draw step, you can activate it because everything's untapped. And then you can copy the trigger with Lithoform Engine if there's more than one card, because again, you're scrying 3 2 times. And you can get a lot of value before you even draw your card. This is amazing. It's the best way to do it. I like it a lot. And of course, we have to throw in Fall of the Thran in there as well, because if we end step Sifter Worm, and then on our turn, we Fall of the Thran, that also regenerates a lot of our energy, because whenever a permanent we control enters the graveyard, we get that much energy. So when all of our lands go into the graveyard, we get all that much energy. Now, unfortunately, none of that stuff triggers because a leaving the battlefield effect is not entering the battlefield effect, so we don't get any benefit from Panharmonicon or Elesh Norn, which is super, super sad. But it's still really good. It prevents them from doing anything to our Sifter Worm, to our Elesh Norn, and we can just kind of swing in over and over and over for the win. That was just the first weird idea that came to mind with Elesh Norn, but I'll most likely be making a Mirror March deck with this card as well. That's not a weird one, is it? That deck's another time anyway, but let me know in the comments section below what you plan on putting in your deck with Elesh Norn. Coming in at number 9 on the list is going to be Geth, Thane of Contracts. Now, this card I'm a little bit skeptical about, but it might have some potential. Now, Geth is a 3-mana, 3/4 legendary Phyrexian zombie that gives all other creatures we control -1/-1, which I don't really agree with, but it is what it is. I feel that there's probably some type of infinite combo with this card because of that. I just don't see it yet, but someone will find it. If you know what it is, let me know in the comment section below. The most important part about this card is that it has a 3-mana tap ability to return target creature card from our graveyard to the battlefield. It gains, if this creature would leave the battlefield, exile it instead of putting it anywhere else, and you can activate only as a sorcery. The main creature that we're going to be trying to reanimate is another new card, Atraxa Grand Unifier. This is a 7-mana legendary Phyrexian angel with flying, vigilance, death touch, and lifelink, which is kind of beefy. But whenever it enters the battlefield, you get to reveal the top 10 cards of our library, and for each card type, we may put a card from that type among revealed cards into our hand, and then put the rest at the bottom of our library in a random order. This is really cool because we can just get like planeswalkers, we can get lands, we can get whatever we want. Enchantments, artifacts, blah, 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 blah. Now, there are loads of creatures that you can reanimate with this, but this one seems to be the most fun right now since black kind of seems to have a problem filling its hands. But if we do end up drawing Atraxa instead of milling it, we do have Liliana of the Veil to really just have each player discard a card. So we get value and then they lose value all at the same time. So it's really just a win-win-win, plus it's only 3 mana. She has remove. I mean, everyone knows Liliana of the Veil is amazing, right? But our mill cards that we have are going to be Cemetery Tampering, which is amazing because it mills every single turn. And we get the potential to cast a spell out of it, as long as they don't have enchantment removal, which is always really sad. But if we have 20 cards in our graveyard, we can then cast whatever card was underneath it. Now, this can be great because it can be another one of the Atraxas. It can be a Mastermind's Acquisition. It can be a Professor Onyx. It could be a lot of our really, really big creatures. It can even be one of our Brass Dragons. Ancient Brass Dragon is a 7-mana 7/6 Elder Dragon with flying. Now, whenever it deals combat damage to a player, we get to roll a d20, which who doesn't like rolling die, right? But when you do, you put any number of target creature cards with mana value, total mana value of X or less from the graveyard onto the battlefield under your control, where X is the result. Now, keep in mind, this is all graveyards, not just ours, because all of our creatures are 7 mana, except for the Geth, which is 3. So again, keep that in mind. Mastermind's Acquisition also gives you so much access to anything that you could possibly need, whether it's a emergency button that you have to hit, whether it's a secondary win condition from sideboard, whether it's just dealing with a control deck using Thought Distortion, which I love Thought Distortion. It's a great card. So as long as they don't counter the Mastermind's Acquisition, and they obviously can't counter Thought Distortion, you're in a great spot. Now let me know in the comments section below what you're going to be reanimating with Geth and how many colors you're going to be using. I personally like mono black. At number 8, we have our very first Planeswalker, which is Koth, Fire of Resistance. This is a 4-mana, 4 loyalty Planeswalker with a +2 loyalty ability. Now, if you don't already know, I love Planeswalkers that cost 4 mana and come in with the 6-pack. They're so resilient to damage-based removal, and on top of that, he can also protect himself by killing a creature with a -3. Let's just get into the abilities. The +2 ability enables you to search your library for a basic mountain card, so no duels or anything, it's really just a mountain. You get to reveal it and put it into your hand, then shuffle. Now, for this ability to be any good, once again, you need a lot of mountains. So I would recommend doing a mono red or a 2-color deck in order for this to be a smooth sailing type of deck. His -3 ability deals damage to target creature equal to the number of mountains you control. Now, this ability specifically doesn't say basic mountains. So it's any mountain that you own. That means we can use Sheltered Thicket, Highland Forest, and Stomping Ground. All of those work for this, and that's why we have them in the particular deck that we built. The Mac Daddy -7 Ultimate from Koth is really cool. You get an emblem with whenever a mountain enters the battlefield under your control, this emblem deals 4 damage to any target. Again, this is any kind of mountain, not just basics. Now you might be thinking that there's no real way that this can get up to 7 loyalty and ult very reliably, or we'll just run out of mountains before it becomes effective, and normally you'll probably be correct, but that's why you're watching this video, right? The very first problem that we have with this card is how do we ultimate Koth reliably? Because that's ultimately what we want to do. We are going to be using a card called Evolution Sage for that, and it will help tremendously. This is just a 3-mana creature that whenever a land enters the battlefield, we get to proliferate. So on turn 3, we can Evo Sage, turn 4, we can Koth, and +2, which gives it 6 loyalty. Then the next turn, we play a land, bringing it up to 7 loyalty, and then ultimate. So in reality, it doesn't seem that difficult to actually get his ultimate off. Pretty simple, because his +2 ability guarantees the land drop. So the 5th land drop that proliferates him to 7, that part's guaranteed. So we don't even have to worry about that. All we need to make sure is that he doesn't take any damage and our Evo Sage stays alive. Those are the only 2 things that we have to make sure happen. Now we have a ton of ways to get a ton of lands onto the battlefield. We have Oracle of Moldiah that allows us to play more than 1 land as well as play lands from the top of our library. We have Druid class that allows us to play another land. We have Scapeshift that enables us to nuke the enemy with 1 big land grab. So we're going to sacrifice all of our lands, bring a bunch of mountains from our library into the battlefield, and just nuke the opponent, because this is 4 damage every single mountain, and we got a lot of mountains in there, right? And worst case scenario, if we don't get it till super late game, we have the Mending of Dominaria, which on the 3rd chapter of the saga, we're going to bring every single land that we have in our graveyard back into the battlefield, which again is another nuke. And then we're just going to shuffle everything back. So it's kind of a anti-mill prevention on top of that. Plus, Scapeshift also reworks from there. We can sacrifice all the lands again, get another Mending of Dominaria, and just wash, rinse, repeat. It's going to be very difficult for people to withstand 1 giant nuke from a Scapeshift or a Mending of Dominaria. Now, I actually didn't have a ton of ideas with Koth outside of things like Scapeshift, but if you had any ideas, let me know in the comments section below exactly how you're going to be building Koth. Number 7 might be one of my favorite cards. Either that or will end up being one of the biggest disappointments. But that card is going to be Green Sun's Twilight. This is an X-Green sorcery that you get to reveal the top X+1 cards from our library and choose a creature and or land card from among them and put it into your hand. Now, if X is 5 or more, then you put them into the battlefield if you want. The reason I'm so excited about this card is that we can find both Strict Proctor and Lotus Field in the same exact spell and put them onto the battlefield, obviously if X is 5 or more, and that is just amazing ramp. Now, we can do that, or we can do something a little bit smaller, like X equals 3, whatever it is, and then hopefully just get them in our hand at the very least, and again, this is still amazing ramp. With that being said, we're using the Bloodshift combo in this as well. So if we can get Blood Sun or Strict Proctor down, and then on turn 4, we Scapeshift to fetch all 4 of our Lotus Fields, this gives us 12 mana to deal with. And that's a lot of mana, especially on turn 5. Now, what do we do with all that mana, you might ask? Well, we're going to be using a Finale of Revelation. This is a X double blue sorcery, and you draw X cards. Now, if X equals 10 or more, you shuffle your graveyard into your library and you draw X cards, and then you untap up to 5 lands, and you have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game. Now, this is amazing because you have 4 Lotus Fields down, which means that's 12 mana at least. Now, blue plus 10 equals 12. So we're going to draw 10 cards, and we're going to untap all 4 of our Lotus Fields. And once again, we have 12 mana to play with, but we just have 10 additional cards in our hand this time around. The overall win condition is Torment of Hailfire. Now, this is just an amazing X black spell that forces each opponent to lose 3 life or sacrifice a non-land permanent or discard a card. Now, if you're doing this for X equals 10 or most likely X equals 11 at that point, early on in the game, they're basically going to have to discard their entire hand and or sacrifice the majority, if not all of their permanents, just to simply stay alive. Now, with you drawing 10 cards, having no maximum hand size, and then doing X equals 11 on Torment of Hailfire on turn 5, that's a huge swing that not a lot of people can come back from. But that's really all it is. All we're doing is casting a bunch of X spells, and that's why we're calling it the X-Men. So let me know if you think I should add a bigger creature into the deck, because right now it doesn't really have any creatures outside of Strict Proctor. But in my opinion, it would really just be for the memes or for extra reliability's sake, I suppose. But yeah, just let me know in the comments section below if you think I should add one. Number 6 on the list is going to look really weird because the way I did it kind of turned more into a Tezzeret deck than anything else, but the card is Encroaching Mycosynth. This is a 4-mana artifact that turns all non-land permanents I control into artifacts in addition to their other types. Now, the same is true for ones in my hand, ones on the stack, so ones I just cast, the library, and in the graveyard. Now, I got a bit too excited and a bit too filled with memes when I started building this deck, but I did opt to go with Tezzeret, the Master of the Bridge. Now, this gives creature and planeswalker spells I control to have affinity for artifacts, and basically everything is cheaper based on how many artifacts that I control because Mycosynth is so great because it turns everything into an artifact. So all the things that I really want to cast, being my planeswalkers and my one creature that I have, it's so good. The creature that I have in the deck that I never get to play is Angel of the Dire Hour. This is a 7-mana 5/4 angel with flash and flying. When it enters the battlefield, if it was cast, exile every attacking creature. It's basically Settle the Wreckage on a stick, and they just don't get any lands from it, which we really like the fact that they don't get any lands because we hate it when the opponents have lands. Everyone knows that. But with enough artifacts on the board, and especially if we have Tezzeret out, it can be 2 mana, which that really just takes everyone by surprise, for sure. Now, back to Tezzeret, Master of the Bridge. He's a 6-mana 5 loyalty planeswalker with the +2 ability of it deals X damage to each opponent where X is the number of artifacts you control and you gain X life. Now, with Mycosynth, everything is an artifact, so this is amazing synergy. His -3 ability is that you get to return an artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. Again, with Mycosynth, everything's an artifact, so everything in your graveyard becomes an artifact. To bring whatever you want back to your hand. Non-lands, obviously. Then, his -8 ability is that you get to exile the top 10 cards of your library and put all artifact cards from among them onto the battlefield. Again, Mycosynth. Tons of synergy with this card. We are using a Tezzeret Artifice Master as well, which is a 5-mana 5 loyalty planeswalker with a +1 ability that creates a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying. Now, this is good because it builds up the artifact count, but it also is a +1 ability that protects the planeswalker itself. It also has a loyalty ability of 0 that allows you to draw a card, but if you control 3+ artifacts, you get to draw 2 cards instead, which is exactly what you need when everything is getting so cheap from the affinity of artifacts. Then, of course, there is a -9 ability where you get an emblem with at the beginning of your end step, search your library for up to 1 permanent card and put it into the battlefield, then shuffle your library. So it's going to work for planeswalkers, it's going to search for a Mycosynth, this is going to search for whatever it is that you could possibly want in the deck. The last Tezzeret that we're going to be using is Tezzeret the Schemer. Now, I don't think anyone likes this Tezzeret except for me, but it's a 4-mana 5 loyalty planeswalker with a +1 ability. So once again, 4-mana planeswalker that comes in with the 6-pack and that can also protect itself. I'm a fan. So the +1 ability allows you to create essentially a treasure token, but they call it an Ethereum token. I assume it was just before treasures were there, so they just called it Ethereum token. But it just taps, sacks, add a mana, right? His -2 ability is some type of removal where target creature gets +X -X until end of turn, where X is the number of artifacts you control. Now, the -7 ultimate, you get an emblem with at the beginning of combat on your turn, target artifact you control becomes an artifact creature with base power and toughness of 5/5. So every single turn you're getting a 5/5, and especially with this, you can start +1ing, getting another Ethereum token and making that a 5/5 every single turn. Now, granted, it's still affected by summoning sickness, but you can do the ones from previous turns and just keep doing that over and over and over again. It's a really nice way to just crank out 5/5s without having to actually cast anything. But that's really all a Tezzeret deck is. You just play a bunch of artifacts, and then you win with those artifacts. And Encroaching Mycosynth really does help with that. I think there's probably a lot of other things you can do with the card, so let me know in the comment section below what ideas you have for it. Halfway through the list, we have Conduit of Worlds at number 5. This is a 4-mana artifact that allows us to play lands from our graveyard. We can also tap it to play a single non-land permanent card in our graveyard. Now, if we haven't cast a spell this turn, we may cast that card. If we do, we can't cast any additional spells that turn, activate only as a sorcery. Now, this does kind of cuck us as it makes us available to only play one spell a turn. However, there are some really big spells and really big sagas that we can cast that we only really want to do one of. The very first card that came to mind when I was looking at this card was the World spell. Now, this is a 7-mana saga with read ahead, where the first 2 chapters allow us to look at the top 7 cards of our library, reveal a non-saga permanent card from among them, and put it into our hand. We put the rest at the bottom of our library in a random order. Then, the 3rd chapter, we get to put 2 non-saga permanents from our hand onto the battlefield. Now, this is great, once again, because we can only cast 1 spell a turn, but with this, we get to put 2 non-saga permanents from our hand into the battlefield every single turn. The benefit of being able to do this is that you can refill your hand, but also play more than 1 card from your hand with only casting 1. These 2 cards really just built for each other. We are also going to be using Gravebreaker Lamia in this deck to both get important cards into our graveyard, but also make cards that we cast from our graveyard using Conduit of Worlds 1 mana cheaper. This is really just like a tutor because we're casting everything from our graveyard anyway, so we're tutoring a card, but it also reduces the mana cost by 1, and it's also a 4/4 with lifelink. And even if it ends up dying, we just cast it again, which also tutors another card into our graveyard. So it's kind of like a catch-22 as far as do they want to kill it and give us another tutor. Granted, we are limited to casting 1 spell a turn, but once again, once we get the World spell out, we're able to get a couple cards from our hand onto the battlefield, and we don't necessarily have to restrict ourselves to 1 card a turn if we're using Conduit of Worlds. We can just not actually use the ability. There is another new card called Cankerbloom, which is a 2-mana 3/2 with 1, sacrifice it to destroy an artifact, enchantment, or proliferate. Now, we can technically do this every single turn, which can be really annoying depending on what the opponent's playing, but if we decide we just want to mill them with Ashiok, we can literally do that every turn. Just proliferate Ashiok, mill, proliferate, mill, proliferate, mill. And that's really messed up. And of course we have 4 copies of Binding the Old Gods because every 30 turns you kind of just want to blow something up. Why not? And if you're building a Conduit of Worlds deck, let me know exactly what you're going to be using with it in the comments section below. Number 4 on the list is going to be both Nissa Ascended Animist and Lukka Bound to Ruin. These 2 are very expensive to put in the same deck, but let's just start with Nissa. She's a 7-mana planeswalker with 7 loyalty, but she's also completed, so you can pay 2 life or 4 life to have her come in with 2 less loyalty or 4 less loyalty respectively. And her +1 creates an XX green Phyrexian horror where X is Nissa's loyalty. This is fantastic. You can make big creatures with this, and we like that. Her -1 destroys target artifact or enchantment. The fact that this is just a -1 is insane because you can do this so many times. Usually, any planeswalker with the removal ability, you can only do it once, maybe twice in the amount of loyalty that they have. But you can -1 this like 4 or 5 times before you're really in any type of danger. So that's really, really good and very important to note. However, her ultimate is a -7 that until end of turn, creatures you control get +1/+1 for each forest you control and gain trample. So this is a huge finisher, basically. Lukka is a 5-mana planeswalker with 5 loyalty. However, he is also completed, so you can pay 2 life for him to come in with 2 less loyalty. And, of course, his +1 is what we really, really care about. It adds green and a red to your mana pool. However, you can only use the mana to cast a creature or activate creature abilities. Now, we will get back into that later, and I'll let you know why it's so important. But his -1 creates a 3/3 green Phyrexian beast creature token with Toxic 1, so it's just nice to be able to block and do whatever. His -4 has Lukka deal X damage divided as we choose to any number of target creatures and or planeswalkers, where X is the greatest power among creatures we control as we activated the ability. Now this is super cool because remember how Nissa also had the ability to make a creature that had the same power and toughness equal to her loyalty. So if you have still that really big creature, you pop down Lukka, you can -4, and at that point you're doing a pretty nice little removal. I wouldn't say board wipe, it kind of depends. It depends on what kind of creatures and planeswalkers they have out, but you can do a lot of damage to clean up their board. The reason that Lukka's +1 ability is so good is because we're using Zacama Primal Calamity. Now, really, I just wanted an excuse to play with Zacama. I mean, that's literally all it is. But Zacama is a 9-mana 9/9 with Vigilance, Reach, and Trample. When it enters the battlefield, if it was cast, untap all lands we control. Then she has 3 activated abilities. First one is 2 colorless and a red to deal 3 damage to target creature. The next one is 2 damage and a green to destroy an artifact or enchantment. And the last one is 2 colorless and a white, and we gain 3 life. Pretty good. The only problem with this is that you can only activate Lukka's ability 1 time a turn, obviously, because that's how planeswalkers work. So it doesn't really help us a whole lot. So what we're going to do in order to counteract this potential terrible nonsense is run Zirda as both a companion as well as run a couple in the deck. Now, Zirda is a 3-mana 3/3 that says abilities we activate that aren't mana abilities cost 2 colorless less to activate. This effect can't reduce mana that costs less than 1 colorless mana. And basically, it's just reducing all of our Zacama abilities to single colored. So it's 1 red or 1 green or 1 white. So this means every single turn, we just uptick Lukka and we get a free 3 damage to a creature or planeswalker. And we get a free destroy artifact or enchantment literally every single turn. And then after that, it's literally just 1 mana to do any of those. It's a ton of life. We just can do whatever we want, whenever we want at that point in time. Sorry, I'm not sure if I said it earlier, but Zacama can only do 3 damage to creatures, not to planeswalkers or players, which is really sad. They need to do an alchemy change and update that to where it can do creatures and planeswalkers, at least. Players might be a bit too OP, but at least creatures and planeswalkers for sure. Everything else that we have in the deck is really just ramp and removal, just trying to support getting all of our expensive planeswalkers and expensive creatures out. So if we can do that, once we can do that, it should be really good. However, I have no idea if it's going to work. So we'll have to try it. But if you have any ideas on how exactly you're going to use these 2 planeswalkers, or if you can use them together, let me know in the comment section below how you're going to use them together. Number 3 on the list, we have Mondrak Glory Dominus. This is a 4-mana 4/4 legendary Phyrexian horror, where if 1 or more tokens were be created under your control, twice that many of those tokens are created instead. It's basically an anointed procession on a stick. It also has a 1 colorless and double Phyrexian white, sacrifice 2 other artifacts and or creatures to put an indestructible counter on Mondrak. Now keep in mind that these are counters, so they can stack. You can have 3 indestructible counters on, and they would have to literally destroy it 3 times, plus an additional time to literally kill it, or just exile it, of course. I will definitely be adding this to my famous / infamous Marionette Master deck. Now, if you're not familiar with that deck, you're in for a treat, let me tell you. So Marionette Master is a 1/3 with Fabricate 3, so you can either put it into the battlefield with 3 1/1s into the battlefield, or you can give it 3 +1/+1 counters, which makes it a 4/6. Now, this also has a passive ability of whenever an artifact you control is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, target opponent loses a life equal to Marionette Master's power. Since it's a 4/6, they will lose 4 life every single time. The cool thing about this is that treasure tokens are artifacts, and they also go to the graveyard before they go into exile or whatever mysterious place they go to. So if we have 5 treasure tokens on the battlefield, when we have Marionette Master out, we can just sacrifice those 5 for mana, and then the opponent loses 20 life. We are going to be getting treasures by using Smothering Tithe. This is a 4-mana enchantment where whenever an opponent draws a card, they either pay 2 colorless or we get a treasure token. Now, in order to speed all of this up even more, we are going to be using Anointed Procession and Mondrak. Now, both of these double tokens, and that's exactly what we want. We want to be able to get as many treasure tokens on the battlefield as possible. Either that's so we can cast our big things, or so that we can go for the finisher, or both. We will also use emergency powers and memory to have each player draw 7 cards, and we'll do that multiple times. Since most people can't pay 14 mana when they draw a card, and most people don't want to do that, we will get a lot of treasures with this. And with emergency powers, we get to put a card with mana value 7 or less from our hand onto the battlefield. So, if we tap out for our emergency powers, each player draws 7 cards, we get 7 treasures. Then, if we also draw Marionette Master, which we pray for every single time, we get to put that onto the battlefield, Fabricate 3, give it +3/+3, and then all we got to do is sacrifice all 7 of those treasure tokens and should win the game at that point, because 7 times 4 is, 28? So hopefully they just don't have more than 28, and that's kind of the worst case scenario, is that we only have 7 treasures. As for number 2 on the list, I'm just going to say that it's Primal Amulet. I love this card, and I'm just going to have a blast with it, considering that there's so much more proliferation going on around the new set. Now, in reality, the new cards that I'm going to be running are Experimental Augury, Serum Snare, and Expand the Sphere. All 3 of these cards proliferate, which is exactly what we need to do in order to flip our Primal Amulet, but also to win the game with Faithbound Judge. Primal Amulet is a 4-mana artifact that makes all of our instants and sorceries 1 colorless cheaper. Now, whenever we cast an instant or sorcery, we're going to put a charge counter on it. Then, if there are 4 or more charge counters on it, we may transform it into Primal Wellspring. Now, Primal Wellspring is just a land that allows us to use the mana that we add from it to automatically copy an instant or sorcery that we cast. The win condition that we are using for this deck is going to be Sinner's Judgment. This is just the flip side of Faithbound Judge, but it is the most important part. For a disturb cost of 7, we can enchant a player. Now, at the beginning of our upkeep, we could put a judgment counter on it. Now, if there are 3 or more judgment counters on it, the enchanted player loses the game. Now, obviously, we can't just put a counter on it right away on that same turn. We have to wait a turn, and unfortunately we can't just proliferate it twice to automatically win the game after that. It has to put a counter on it and then it does something. So unfortunately you can only speed it up by 1 turn by proliferating it once, but speeding up by 1 turn is still speeding it up by 1 turn. Experimental Augury is a 2-mana instant that looks at the top 3 cards of the library. We get to put 1 in our hand, the rest at the bottom of the library in any order, and then proliferate. Serum Snare is a 2-mana return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. If that permanent had mana value 3 or less, we get to proliferate again, which is nice. Expand the Sphere is a 4-mana sorcery where you get to look at the top 6 cards of our library, and then you get to put up to 2 land cards from among them into the battlefield tapped, and then the rest of the bottom of your library in a random order. Now, If you put fewer than 2 lands onto the battlefield this way, you proliferate a number of times equal to the difference, which is amazing because it's a May ability, so you don't have to do it. You can proliferate 2 times if you want to. Super easy. The last Proliferate card that we have in the deck is Tezzeret's Gambit. This is a 3 colorless Phyrexian blue sorcery that draws 2 cards that then proliferates. Now, I think with all of this proliferation, we should be using a Planeswalker or something that's a little bit more impactful, but at the same time, Fatebound Judge is just an easy win condition. It doesn't really need to be impactful when it's just like you win the game or the opponent loses the game. So I would also like to put in a few more instants and sorceries, maybe something that benefits a bit more from Primal Amulet. Maybe I'm doing a little bit too many things all in one. I'm still not 100% sure, but I just need some more time to think about it and some time to test around it. So if you have any ideas, then let me know in the comment section below. Now here is the Mac Daddy, the card that you've all been waiting for, the one, the only, the number 1 card that I'm most excited to play with. All will be 1. This is a 5-mana enchantment where whenever you put 1 or more counters on a permanent or player, All Will Be 1 deals that much damage to target opponent or something the opponent controls. Now, we also have a supporting card of Solphim, Mayhem, Dominus, which is a 4-mana 5/4 legendary Phyrexian horror, where if a source we control would deal non-combat damage to an opponent or permanent opponent controls, it deals double that damage. I decided that I haven't done Dragonspark Reactor in a while, so this is what I decided to go with. Dragonspark Reactor is a 2-mana artifact. Whenever it or another artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you put a charge counter on it. Now, these are counters, so if All Will Be 1 is on the battlefield, you do damage based on however many times you put an artifact on the battlefield, which is pretty nice, right? And again, with Solphim out, it's going to double that damage. So if you cast a Mind Stone, it's going to do 2 damage to something, which is pretty nice, I must say. However, like I said, it is going to put a counter on Dragonspark Reactor. Dragonspark Reactor also has a 4 colorless and sacrifice ability of it deals damage equal to the number of charge counters on it to target player and that much damage to target creature. This is wackadoo because if we have Solphim out, it's going to do double that damage once again. So not only are we going to do damage based on getting counters, we're also going to do damage based on how many counters we have, and then we can start doubling that damage all over the place. So it's a super, super fun looking deck. I think it's going to be great because we just have a ton of ramp, a ton of artifacts. It's going to be a blast. I can almost guarantee it. Maybe kind of hopefully, probably. It's got to be. Worst case scenario, we can just throw in the 6-mana Chandra in here because once again, it's any counters being put on a permanent you control. When a Planeswalker comes into the battlefield, it technically starts with 0 counters and then it adds that many counters. So it's, whenever you play 6-mana Chandra, it comes in with 6 counters and then you +2. So it's going to be 8 damage just by that already to the opponent. And again, if you have Solphim out, it's going to be 16 damage, and then they take 1 on their upkeep, so it's 17. You know, there's a lot of little cool things that you can do with All Will Be 1. It's just a matter of how much you want to do it. Overall, I think this is an amazing set. I'm super excited about it. So if you are just as excited as I am, make sure to hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, hit the notification bell, all that stuff. Stay salty. Enjoy the content.
Thank you all so much for watching. If you made it to this point, it means you either really enjoyed the video or you fell asleep and I'm waking you up now. Either way, thank you for all the support. I really do appreciate it. If you want to see more videos like this, hit that subscribe button, hit the bell notification, come out with videos 7 days a week.